Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Azerbaijan says Armenia has crossed the red line by firing 4 missiles at a densely populated residential area in the Ganja city. In a tweet, head of the Foreign Policy Affairs, Hikmet Hajiyev, said Azerbaijan retains its right to take adequate measures against Armenia to enforce peace. The Foreign Ministry said a civilian has been killed and 4 others wounded in the Armenian rocket attack on Ganja. In Pakistan, security forces have killed 2 terrorists during an intelligence-based operation in the northwestern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In a statement, the military's media wing said security forces also arrested a terrorist in the operation. Britain and France have posted record high rise in daily coronavirus cases since second wave of the pandemic. In a video, US President Donald Trump says he is doing well, but the next few days will be the real test. Meanwhile, India has recorded 940 deaths and 76,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. Here in Pakistan, 6 more people have lost their lives to the virus, raising the toll to 6,513. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed over 1,031,000 lives and infected 34.7 million. Turkey has slammed Israel for approving new settlement units in the occupied West Bank. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said the new settlements violate international law and UN resolutions. It urged the world to resist attacks on the rights of the Palestinians. Muslims in Saudi Arabia have been allowed to perform the UMRAH pilgrimage after 7 months hiatus due to the coronavirus pandemic. Saudi state media said in the first phase, 6,000 people began performing the pilgrimage under strict social distancing measures. Visitors from abroad will be permitted on the 1st of November after the capacity is raised to 20,000 pilgrims per day. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Start from Azerbaijan, which says Armenia has crossed the red line by firing 4 missiles at a densely populated residential area in the Ganja city. In a tweet, head of the Foreign Policy Affairs, Hikmet Hajiyev, said Azerbaijan retained its right to take adequate measures against Armenia to enforce peace. He said Azerbaijan will destroy military targets inside Armenia from which shelling of its population centers is taking place. The Foreign Ministry said a civilian has been killed and 4 others wounded in the Armenian rocket attack on Ganja. But Armenia denied it had directed fire of any kind towards Azerbaijan. While the leader of Nagorno-Karabakh said his forces had targeted a military airbase in Ganja but later stopped firing. The developments marked a sharp escalation of the war in the South Caucasus that broke out 1 week ago. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, security forces have killed 2 terrorists during an intelligence-based operation in the northwestern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In a statement, the military's media wing said security forces also arrested a terrorist in the operation. On Friday, 2 terrorists were killed in a similar operation in the North Waziristan district. According to the military, the terrorists were involved in the killing of civilians and attacks of security forces. Now, moving on, Britain and France have posted record high rises in the daily number of coronavirus cases in the past 24 hours. France reported 17,000 new cases with 49 additional deaths, while in Britain, the Health Ministry reported almost 13,000 new cases. Meanwhile, India has recorded 940 deaths and nearly 76,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. While globally, the coronavirus has claimed over 1,031,000 lives and infected 34.7 million. This report has details.
As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to batter the Americas, second wave is now raging in Western Europe. Both France and the UK are struggling to keep the spread of the virus in check merely weeks after returning to an almost normal daily life. In Latin America, Brazil continues to report consistently higher numbers, although it is no longer considered the global epicenter. Meanwhile, New York-based Regeneron Pharmaceuticals talked up its COVID-19 treatment after Trump's medical team opted to use its antibody cocktail.
What our approach is simply we've pioneered technologies over the last 20 plus years that allow us to make the best of antibodies that humans would normally make against the virus, but we can make these outside of the body. We can grow them in these large bioreactors, highly purify and concentrate them, and then give them back to patients.
Over in mainland China, authorities reported 16 new imported cases with 0 new locally transmitted infections. Elsewhere in Australia's largest state of Victoria, the cases crept up into double digits as 12 people were diagnosed with the coronavirus overnight. In a televised briefing, Victoria Premier Daniel Andrews urged the public to not do anything selfish that could potentially keep them in a longer lockdown.
Let's not any of us do anything to jeopardise where we find ourselves. It's delicately poised, but we are there, ready. If we continue these numbers, continue this trend, we are ready to take that step, all things being equal, in just a couple of weeks' time. It's not too much for all of us just to see this thing through. That's the only option we have. If we try and shortcut this thing, then we'll be back where we were weeks and months ago.
Earlier, Tunisian authorities banned all gatherings and reduced working hours for employees in the public sector to stop the rapid spread of the coronavirus. The African nation's tourism-dependent economy has contracted by 21.6% in the second quarter due to the pandemic-related measures.
Now, US President Donald Trump says he has been feeling better since arriving at a military facility, but the next few days will be a real test. President Trump and the First Lady Melania Trump have been in quarantine after testing positive for COVID-19. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows reportedly said next 48 hours will be critical for the president. He said President's vitals over the last 24 hours were very concerning and he is yet to be on a clear path to recovery. President Trump said the physicians will know his condition for sure in a few days, but he hopes to be back soon.
I had no choice because I just didn't want to stay in the White House. I was given that alternative. Stay in the White House, lock yourself in, don't ever leave, don't even go to the Oval Office. Just stay upstairs and enjoy it. Don't see people, don't talk to people, and just be done with it. And I can't do that. I had to be out front, and this is America. This is the United States. This is the greatest country in the world. This is the most powerful country in the world. I can't be locked up in a room upstairs.
Meanwhile, White House physician John Conley said Trump has been fever-free for the last 24 hours now. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has warned against a possible second wave of coronavirus in the country. In a tweet, Khan said the spike in coronavirus infections can be triggered by the onset of winters. The Prime Minister urged people to strictly ensure the implementation of the SOPs and wear masks in the public areas. 6 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to 6,513. The Health Ministry says over 600 more tested positive overnight. It said there are 9,135 total active cases in the country. The ministry said out of over 314,000 detected cases, more than 298,000 have recovered so far. It said over 138,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while over 99,000 reported in Punjab so far. The National Command and Operations Centre says 95 people across the country are on ventilators. Now, New Delhi has refused to open the Kartarpur corridor for the Indian Sikhs wanting to visit their holy place inside Pakistan. The government says the corridor cannot be opened because of COVID-19. While at the same time, India has opened the Taj Mahal for tourists. Indian Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson says the corridor will be opened in accordance with the easing of restrictions. Pakistan reopened the corridor from its side of the border on Friday in wake of overall improvement in COVID-19 situation in the country. Visitors are allowed to come daily from dawn to dusk. Indian investigators have exhumed the bodies of 3 young men in Western Baramulla district of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This comes 2 weeks after the Indian military, in a rare admission, said its soldiers exceeded their legal powers in killing the men. Police said their team and medical officials handed the bodies over to their families for burial. The father of one of the victims said the 3 were killed in cold blood. Occupied Kashmir has been reeling under a curfew ever since India revoked its special status last year. Dozens of Kashmiris have been killed at the hands of Indian troops in fake encounters. A notorious Emergency Powers Act allows Indian forces to search and even shoot suspects without any prosecution. For years now, Kashmiri civilians and activists have accused Indian troops of abusing their powers and repeatedly targeting innocent civilians. Moving on, Afghanistan's chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah, has briefed President Ashraf Ghani over his recent visit to Pakistan. Abdullah met with Ghani at the presidential palace. In a Twitter post, President spokesperson Sadiq Siddiqui said the 2 officials discussed the ongoing peace process and the way forward. Abdullah had held meetings with Pakistan's President Arif Alvi, Prime Minister Imran Khan and the Foreign Minister this week. He is scheduled to travel to India next week. Now, Turkey has strongly condemned the Israeli authorities for approving new settlement units in the occupied West Bank. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said the new settlements are against international law as well as UN resolutions. It urged the world to resist attacks on the rights of the Palestinians. The ministry said Tel Aviv has not given up on its annexation policy. It said Palestine's land belongs to its people and that Ankara will continue to support their cause. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis have defied a ban on the anti-government protests to demand Prime Minister Netanyahu's resignation. A new law bans Israelis from holding demonstrations more than 1 kilometer from their homes and forces stricter social distancing. Violence broke out as a handful of protest locations among over 1,000 throughout the country. A police spokesperson says 38 protesters have been arrested as they gather near Netanyahu's residency for the 15th straight week. The demonstrators called for Prime Minister's resignation over his indictment and mishandling of COVID-19 pandemic. Netanyahu is on trial for bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Meanwhile, Hamas has called for speeding up intra-Palestinian talks to reach a national roadmap for achieving reconciliation. Last month, the group held talks with its rival Fatah in Istanbul to discuss ways of achieving a partnership between the two. In a statement, Hamas said the meetings constituted a prelude to a comprehensive Palestinian dialogue. It called for creating a favorable atmosphere to reaching solutions to the outstanding issues as a step towards unity. The talks came almost 3 weeks after the Palestinian factions agreed during meetings in Ramallah and Beirut to hold free and transparent elections. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, French-Iranian academic Fariba Adelkha has been temporarily released from prison and is currently in Tehran. According to her lawyer, Adelkha has been released with an electronic bracelet and is now with her family. Her attorney said he hopes this temporary release will become final. A research director at Sciences Po University in Paris, Adelkha was arrested in June last year. She was sentenced in May to 5 years in prison for allegedly conspiring against national security. Adelkha is a citizen of Iran and France, but Iran does not recognize dual nationality. Now, Iraqi forces have arrested 26 suspected ISIS militants in a security swoop in the northern Nineveh province. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said the militants were detained after receiving information from a terrorist already in captivity. The statement said the suspects confessed of carrying out terrorist attacks against the security forces. In 2017, officials in Baghdad declared the military presence of ISIS in Iraq and had been all but destroyed. But the terrorists still have a presence in rural areas of Anbar, Diyala, Kirkuk, Salatin and Mosul. The Iraqi army continues to carry out operations against the group in parts of the country. Now, the Human Rights Watch says Rohingya Muslims are being subjected to institutional oppressions in Myanmar's detention camps. In a statement, the international watchdog said the Myanmar government is committing grave rights violations in confinement centres. It said about 130,000 Rohingyas are detained in the camp since being displaced in a 2012 campaign of ethnic cleansing by Myanmar's military. It added the conditions amount to the crimes against humanity of apartheid, persecution and severe deprivation of liberty. Human Rights Watch urged Naypyidaw to lift all arbitrary movement restrictions for Rohingya, Kaman and other minorities. Now, Muslims in Saudi Arabia have been allowed to perform the UMRAH pilgrimage after 7 months hiatus due to the coronavirus pandemic. Saudi state media said in the first phase, 6,000 people begin performing the pilgrimage under strict social distancing measures. He said 15,000 pilgrims will be allowed in the second phase that will begin on the 18th of October. Visitors from abroad will be permitted from 1st of November after the capacity is raised to 20,000 pilgrims per day. The state media said 100% revival of the pilgrimage is subject to the end of the pandemic. Now, Belarusian security forces say they have detained 11 people for participating in what they called unauthorized protests in Minsk. A spokesperson for the police said no journalists were among those detained during the latest protest. This comes after the United States slapped sanctions on 8 Belarusian officials, including Interior Minister Yuri Karayev. In a statement, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said Belarusians' democratic rights have been met with violence from officials. The EU has also blacklisted 40 officials accused of rigging August's presidential elections in Belarus. Responding, Belarus announced its retaliatory sanctions against the European Union. The Foreign Ministry said Minsk believes in dialogue but is determined to respond to unfriendly actions. Moving on, Germany says the European Union will have to impose sanctions on Russia if it's confirmed that Alexei Navalny was poisoned with a banned nerve agent. In an interview, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said there will be a clear response from the EU with no way around sanctions. Maas said such a serious violation of the International Chemical Weapons Convention cannot remain unanswered. Berlin claims Navalny was poisoned with a substance from the Soviet-developed Novichok group. The EU is awaiting the conclusion of an investigation by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons before taking any action. Earlier, Russian said German Foreign Minister has refused Moscow's request of consular access to Navalny. Meanwhile, voters in Kyrgyzstan are casting their ballots in the country's parliamentary elections. A total of 16 parties are contesting 120 seats in the single-chamber parliament. Pre-poll surveys predict President Sooronbay Jeenbekov's party is likely to win a significant number of seats in the legislature. Jeenbekov's campaign was marred by allegations of vote buying. The current ruling coalition is certain to be upset due to the internal splits in the two major political groups. The two parties being seen as strongest in elections are Berimdik and Mekanim, Kyrgyzstan. The Berimdik is viewed as loyal to Jeenbekov and includes his brother and former parliamentary speaker among its candidates. Its main rival, the Mekanim, Kyrgyzstan, was the target of last year's anti-corruption protests. The U.S. has conducted military training and reconnaissance drills around the Korean peninsula amid rising tensions with China. This comes after Beijing simultaneously held military drills in the South and East China Seas earlier this week. American Pacific Air Forces said U.S. Air Force conducted the Joint Bomber Task Force with Japanese Air Self-Defense Force in the EST. It said the bombers also conducted joint training with a U.S. Navy Growler and electronic carrier-based aircraft. The American Navy also deployed its reconnaissance aircraft above South Korea's western shores. The training comes amid fragile inter-Korean relations and an upcoming North Korean military parade. Now, more than 2,500 firefighters are battling the wildfires as they deploy water-dropping helicopters in the U.S. state of California. The fire continues to rage in the foothills of the Napa Valley and has already destroyed 248 homes and burned over 63,000 acres of land. California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection said the low moisture, warm and dry weather conditions are contributing to active fires. Earlier, the National Weather Service issued red flag warnings for high winds for the following 2 days. California Governor Gavin Newsom has blamed decades of poor forest management for the fires. The fires have claimed 30 lives in California, while 10 in Oregon and Washington since August 15. Meanwhile, 2 people have died and at least 25 are missing after the powerful storm Alex hits the southern France and northwestern Italy. The storm's high-speed winds and torrential rains have caused severe floods in Italy. Local government officials say 17 people are missing in Italy, including a group of at least 4 German trekkers. Roads and bridges have been swept away by floodwaters as several rivers overflowed their banks. In France, authorities say 8 people are reported to be missing. The Met Department of France said 450 millimeters of rain fell in some areas in just 24 hours, which is equivalent to 4 months of the downpour. Tropical storm Gamma has made landfall on the eastern side of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says the storm has weakened, but authorities issued hurricane warnings in the area. The Hurricane Center said the storm touched down at the beach city of Tulum with maximum sustained winds of 112 kilometers per hour. The center says the local population should take necessary precautions to protect life and property. Gamma is forecast to bring as much as 381 millimeters rain over the next several days amid fears of flash flooding and mudslides. Now, Egypt has put on show dozens of coffins belonging to priests and clerks from the 26th dynasty nearly 2,500 years ago. The 59 coffins were discovered in August at the UNESCO World Heritage Site south of Cairo. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities Secretary General Mustafa Al-Waziri said tons more coffins were found in the vast Saqqara necropolis just days ago. The coffins were buried in 3 10 to 12-meter shafts along with 28 statues of the ancient Egyptian god Seko. Waziri said the coffins were uncovered in perfect condition due to a protective seal that preserved them from chemical reactions. He said an Egyptian archaeological mission will continue opening the coffins and study their contents. The sarcophaguses will be displayed at the Grand Egyptian Museum, expected to open next year. A group of Palestinian teenagers has been practicing parkour in the blockaded Gaza Strip among the damaged buildings and rubble. Despite the opposition of their families, they resume their urban activity, which involves climbing and running over buildings and grounds. Details in this report.
Leaping on a building and flipping through the air, jumping over obstacles, these Palestinian parkour athletes hope to make a name for themselves. The boys are leaping to new heights without formal training.
I have been doing parkour for 2 years. Now I'm 14 years old. We have to prefer these abandoned areas because there is no alternative.
Despite the opposition of their families, they resume their activity, which involves climbing and running over buildings and grounds. They have another obstacle which they must leap over, that is the lack of support and facilities.
We gathered for training in an abandoned area close to everyone. We don't have a stadium or a club. We prefer such demolished places to demonstrate our sports. We couldn't find anyone to support us.
In spite of Israeli blockade of Gaza Strip and West Bank, the determined group of parkour athletes resumes the urban activity. Palestinian authorities say Israeli airstrikes have damaged thousands of houses in the Gaza city. Some 65,000 Palestinians were left homeless in Gaza, where infrastructure was badly damaged due to the attacks.
A week-long holiday in China is full of celebrations across the country. Authorities say a total of 108 million domestic tourist trips have been recorded so far, with tourism revenue reaching 76.5 billion yuan. What festivities made Chinese travel? In this report.
Celebration vibes are full on in China's holidays that started with the National Day and include the Mid-Autumn Festival. Light shows, carnivals, food festivals and group weddings, every event has been spectacular. Group weddings for some 300 couples were held simultaneously in 7 places in northwest China's Shaanxi province. Couples holding the national flags mixed National Day celebrations into the ceremonies.
As we were occupied with our work previously, we did not have a wedding after we obtained our wedding certificates. So this wedding today also realized a dream of mine. I think this is a quite memorable day.
In the coastal city of Weihai in East China's Shandong province, a fresh oyster festival was put up, which attracted foodies and tourists to feast on. In another food festival, villagers gathered to have noodle together, as noodle symbolizes longevity in the Chinese culture. Over in Wuhan, Chinese cultural items including paper cuts, clay sculpture, and oiled paper umbrella are being offered to tourists.
Wuhan's epidemic situation is now under control, and the city will open all its scenic spots to tourists for free as a gratitude to the people's support in our fight against the epidemic. As an inheritor of intangible cultural heritage, I hope to make my part of contribution.
Other than delicacies, sightseeing is being popular too. The second longest river in China, the Yellow River is one of the places that has drawn a huge number of tourists.
Now, a French brand has pushed the boats out for its latest fashion show in Paris. The brand hosted its catwalk display on the banks of the Seine River at dusk. Details in this report.
Seine River welcomed the guests in boats to enjoy a glamorous show on its banks. Launched by designer Alexander Mathieusi, 10-year-old fashion label AMI's latest looks were flaunted by some regular Parisian models. Guests looked on from a barge surrounded by Paris's romantic bridges where passers-by stopped to watch. Mathieusi says it was not an easy task to manage the collection while the majority of people were working from home.
I really love this collection because it has been made during the lockdown. You know, I've been working at the office, at the studio by myself. All my teams were working at home, so we were working very slowly because in the same time the manufacturers and the suppliers were you know, working half-time too. So it was a long process of, you know, making choices and trying to guide everyone in the right direction, and we just try to make it like very light, very poetic, and very easy.
The brand is one of a reduced numbers presenting collections with physical events this season. Some labels opted for digital displays and videos for the Paris Fashion Week. But the designer says it feels good to join people over something while the pandemic shakes the world.
We need to celebrate a little bit, and I think when you have this kind of crisis, you need to, because it's very easy to fall into a kind of depression, you know. So I feel like there is a kind of challenge and responsibility to look up and to look at the light and maybe to participate at this kind of, you know, beginning again.
The collection was the first major women's wear for the brand, which first erupted on the scene with men's clothing. The collection included long dresses, suit ensembles, shorts and pencil skirts, while several models wore ruffled pastel dresses with a Pior-style collar.
In the English Premier League, Leeds United have played out a 1-1 draw with Manchester City at Allen Road. Manchester City's Pep Guardiola faced Leeds boss Marcelo Bielsa for the first time in England, whom he considers his coaching inspiration. City were dominant early and Raheem Sterling find some of his first league goal of the season in the 17th minute. City continued to create chances but lacked the killer touch, and the host struck back after the break, with Rodrigo Moreno scoring in the 59th minute. Leeds upped the tempo after the equaliser, but the citizens weathered the storm, leaving Leeds in 5th spot, 5 places ahead of City in the 10th. Meanwhile, Newcastle United registered their first home win of the season with a 3-1 win over Burnley at the St James Park. Pakistan's Usman Wazir beats Indonesia's Boyda Bulldozer to win the Asian Boxing Federation title. It was the first ever professional bout staged at the Amir Khan Boxing Complex in Islamabad. 8 other professional bouts were also held on the day. A majority of those fights saw Pakistani boxers taking on opponents from Afghanistan and Indonesia. Pakistan's Kamran Wahab and Mohammad Zaman also featured in a 6-round lightweight bout. On Thursday, Amir Khan held a press conference to highlight efforts in promoting professional boxing in Pakistan. Kenya's Brigid Kosgei has secured a dominant victory in the women's category at the London Marathon. Kosgei convincingly beat her rivals on the multi-lap course in 2 hours 18.58 minutes amid relentless rain. It was Kosgei's first marathon since setting the world record of 2 hours 14 minutes 0.4 minutes in Chicago a year ago. The world record holder opened a lead of about 50 meters within a couple of minutes after reaching the 32 kilometers mark. American athlete Sarah Hurl produced a thrilling finish to snatch second place from Kenya's world champion Ruth. With a difference of 0.04 minutes, the race was originally scheduled for April before it was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now Kenya's Eliud Kipchoge is the red-hot favorite to win the men's race. And now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.